everyone, to our next Zoom into Books program. Today, we have a very exciting program for you. We are going to be discussing the newly released feature film, Phoenix, Oregon, with actor Jesse Borrego and writer and producer Gary Lundgren, with our guest interviewer, Burke Allen from Allen Media Strategies. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Go ahead and take it away, Burke.
Hey, thanks, Ashley. And if you're not familiar with this film, we're happy to bring it to you on a unique platform today. Zoom into Books is a book platform where people talk about stories, and this story is really unique of Phoenix, Oregon, and we're so pleased to have one of the stars of the film, Jesse Borrego, with us, as well as the director and writer of this story, Gary Lundgren. And Gary, I'd like to start with you, and let's talk about where you began as a writer in coming up with the story behind Phoenix, Oregon.
Yeah, well, Phoenix, Oregon is my fourth movie. So, getting into my 40s was a big part of the storyline. Just the midlife crisis era where you're feeling the clock ticking, and so this is a story about a couple of good friends who open up a bowling alley, and it's a fun story, but it's also a story about sort of seizing the day while you have time and pursue some of these passions that you haven't pursued for a long time, or maybe passions that you put off for a while. So that was the basic inspiration behind the story.
And you're an Oregon guy. As a matter of fact, it looks like you're joining us from your back porch there in Oregon. Phoenix, Oregon is a small town there. Is that close to where you're from, or what was your connection to the town of Phoenix, Oregon?
Yeah, we were making a film called Calvin Marshall. It's a baseball film with Steve Zahn, and we came from LA and shot it in Medford, Oregon. And so my wife and I, Annie, who's one of the producers, we fell in love with the area. And yeah, Phoenix, Oregon is a little town between Ashland and Medford, and if you blink, you'll miss it driving through. And there was just something quaint and unique and bizarre about it to me at the times. I was a fan of the film Paris, Texas, and so I always thought Phoenix, Oregon would make a good name for a movie. And years later, it felt appropriate.
There's so much to unpack about this movie, but I wonder if Shaylee from my office, if you could put up the first slide, which is a poster for the film Phoenix, Oregon. And while that's being put up, Jesse Borrego, one of the stars of the film, what is it that drew you to this story when you were approached by your agent or Gary or however that works in Hollywood, and they said, hey, there's this movie and we think you'd be good for it? What was it that drew you to the part?
Well, I think as actors, you're always looking for those characters that not only that you want to be proud to represent, but projects that I think are uplifting and that say something about the human experience. And so I found that a lot in independent films and independent scripts. And so one of the guys I work with a lot, Peter Bratt, told me about Gary and Annie and said, the Lundgrens are these beautiful people, but they're these incredible filmmakers. They're in Oregon, and they've got this project with these great Latino characters, and they want to talk to you about it. And I think Peter had mentioned me to Gary, and he knew my work. So once I read the script, it was a no-brainer, because I saw how the story itself resonated with me, being in my late 50s and already dealing with the what we call the midlife crisis, and it really is for these characters especially, and for people who kind of get the message. It's about people who have hit that point in their life where there's either a dream deferred, where there's the dream deferred on one side and inevitability on the other. And what do you do with that? And so you see the two sides of the same coin with these two guys. And then knowing that, again, if you look at the poster, knowing that James LeGros was going to play Bobby, knowing his work, being a fan of his work, and knowing that if I could do what I could do with him together, that we could really bring Gary's characters to life. and that quite possibly that this story would have life past the indie shelf life, which usually is very, very short. So it was kind of beautiful to see that type of passion continue when I got to Oregon and I saw the people that they were working with. And I mean, just committed filmmakers, just this group of inspired, passionate storytellers. And then meeting the cast, getting to work with James, seeing what he was doing. Once Lisa got on the set, seeing what she was doing with Tanya, and then Diedrich showed up and did his thing, Ray Gallegos, and then Kevin Corrigan showed up, and all of these actors just showing up, and they're doing their couple of days of this best work. So you know, it's great to be able to read something, go, wow, this could be fun, and then actually having fun doing it. So yeah, it was a no-brainer, and I think once I read the script, Gary's writing just caught me right away.
And there will be a lot of writers who are watching because this is a book platform. Jesse, you said something I want to touch on. You know, we've got the picture of James up from the movie poster, and you play James' best friend, Carlos. But you mentioned, and you sort of blew past it, I don't want to get away from that point, that this movie showed positive Hispanic characters. And before we began the interview, you had said something to me that was kind of heartbreaking, frankly, that you get approached a lot to play characters that are not good people. And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit, because I think that might surprise a lot of folks that in 2020 that those stereotypes are still out there for actors.
Yeah, well, I think it's all about cultural perspective, and that's something that I always look for in artists that I want to collaborate with. And I think that's the beauty of being in this industry at this time, is that I've seen a change. When I got into the industry in the mid 80s, there were very few positive Latino characters in American cinema and television. I was lucky enough to get onto a show called Fame, which was very multicultural. And so I got a chance in the beginning of my career to do series television playing a character that was positive, Jesse Velasquez. People resonated with him. People loved him around the world. And so I kind of got spoiled with those 3 years of doing that television show. And so after that, I kind of tried to base my choices on, you know, characters that I felt would represent who we really are in the human experience. And I'm talking about perspective more than anything else. So it's about the writing. It's about the story that you're telling. And I think that's what really struck me about Phoenix, Oregon. And not only was Gary really, I think, kind of honorific to our culture, he was sensitive to the fact that he didn't have to patronize it. And I think that's the other side of the coin, where you kind of go to the other side and you're kind of trying to show the Latino culture as something other than, you know, and I think that's the beauty of Carlos. Is Carlos is just really, he's an American guy, you know. Right. He was raised in America, but he's multicultural. He speaks bilingually. You know, his father, you know, is obviously a very Latino character. Speaks only very little English, and yet those things aren't pointed out in the script. They're just part of the background of his character, and yet they're part of the richness of this tapestry, this narrative. And so you see that in all of the characters. If you look at Rudy, so Rudy is one of the producers of this project, Louis Rodriguez, and that was another beautiful thing that I thought that Annie and Gary, they take all of these influences around them and they're able to infuse that in their art, in their aesthetic. And so it was just a beautiful thing to see that happening around me without having to police it and point it out and say, hey, you know what, it shouldn't be this, it should be that. And so it was such a pleasure to work on an independent set, but on an American film, and yet still be able to be myself and represent myself. And like you said, I spent so much time looking at auditions, saying no to even just the audition and the possibility of work. Sometimes I see a new series come on and I just look at it and I go, the cultural perspective is wrong, and quite possibly I won't ever work on that show. And that's difficult because this is what I do for a living. But when I do projects like Phoenix, Oregon, then it gives me that inspiration and that passion to keep doing what I'm doing. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so behind continuing to push the project in terms of people watching it. You know, this is what it's all about. For Gary and Annie, they spend years and years and years developing things. For Gary as a filmmaker, they spend, you know, months and months preparing. And then after it's over, they spend another months to a year or so trying to finish it and get that project that they want to get out there. And now you're back at square one, at square zero. How do I get it out to my core audience? How do I get past that? So I think it was serendipitous that all of this happened at the time that we were about to theatrically open, because we were able then, everybody, the media strategists, the distribution team was able to pivot quickly to getting it to our core audience, and an uplifting story that possibly in another time might not have resonated as much. Now suddenly it's there for people to watch, to absorb at a time when they really need it. And I think these characters, you're gonna love Bobby, you're gonna love Carlos, you're gonna love, and everybody goes through there, even Diedrich, who's the heavy, Diedrich Bader, who came in and did such an incredible job with such little time to prepare. These characters go through, you love them, you know, you hate them and you love them, because they're all going through kind of the same thing. These dream deferred, these passions laid aside. And now at this point in our life, and I'm sure everybody's going through this with this pandemic, where you kind of look at things and you kind of go, well, what's important in my life and what's not? And you realize that those things that you had, that you were passionate about, are still there. They're still within your grasp, but you now have to take that risk. And, you know, that's all about that dynamic between Carlos and Bobby. One guy is ready to take the risk. You know, Carlos very clearly says, great writing by Gary, but he has this very poignant moment where he lets him, you know, he lets Bobby know, this is my dream. I have to go for it. And that inspires Bobby to jump in. And there you go with the story. So I think every character in this story has that element, that theme of desperation. And what do you do with that desperation? You know, do you let it take you over the cliff of inevitability and oblivion, or do you rise from the ashes like a phoenix, you know? And I think that's what it's all about, you know.
The movie is Phoenix, Oregon. If you haven't seen it yet, you can check it out at phoenixoregonmovie.com. And Jesse Borrego, one of the co-stars of the film, joins us along with the director and writer of the film, Phoenix, Oregon. And I'd like to talk, Gary, about what happened when it was time for this movie to be released. And you know, our company was very fortunate to have the opportunity to work on this great movie. And you know, there's months and months of planning on our behalf and years of planning literally on your behalf. And then things start to unravel with the pandemic and COVID-19. And we're all on the phone at the beginning of March. And I think the movie was set to premiere in theaters March 21st. Well, you know, by the time we get to mid-March, movie theaters are shuttering everywhere. And you developed very quickly with your team this theatrical at home concept to partner with movie theaters. So and that may not be exactly your end of the snake, but I know you're very, very involved in the process. Take me through what's going on in your mind when you see that this labor of love you worked on for all this time, it looks like it's going to get zero audience because of the pandemic. What happens up here for you?
Well, you know, Burke, we had a great run last summer. So we screened in over 60 cities. We had film festivals, lots of one-off screenings, and it sort of built our confidence in the movie, where audiences were loving it and were inspired by it. And so that led to a theatrical release with Aspiration Entertainment. We put our distribution team together about 6 months ago now. And yeah, March 20th was the day when we were going to open all over the country, and a sort of a platform release where it was going to be in 30 cinemas and expand to hundreds of cinemas. But because of our relationship with the theaters we developed last summer, we realized a lot of these theaters are mom and pop cinemas, independently owned. You know, there are cinemas that are they're business owners, you know, and not only that, they're curating movies for their audiences wherever they're at. And so we started to have a really good uh, rapport with a lot of these theater owners. And so that's what led to the pivot on March 20th, where we thought, wow, these theaters have shuttered too. It's not just about our movie, but it's these business owners that rely on moviegoers to keep their lights on. And so it was a real natural pivot to share the box office with these cinemas. And Annie, who's brilliant, developed and coded this whole theatrical at home site so that theaters could actually share in the profit. You know, they could actually make you know, curate the film to their audience and then bring them half the ticket price. And so with all that said, a lot of the cinemas got to make some money that month, and not just that month, but it's been continuing. We've been adding theaters, so any kind of partner who is promoting their film festival or their cinema can stream it through the theatrical at home platform that Annie created, and the ticket price can be shared. So, and you know, it was one of those things where a curveball is thrown at you, and you experience this a lot with filmmaking, where you have your ideal plan, and of course it never works out the way you think it is, but you just learn to pivot and make good decisions on your feet, and it was just an extension of that, really.
You know, you're being very humble about this, and you give me that aw shucks thing a little, but I want to make sure that the folks who are watching realize just how important this is. This movie was set to debut across the country in theaters. The movie theaters shut down, and at that point, the big studios out there shifted and released all their movies digitally to homes, and they charged $20 for these new movies, and they cut their movie theater partners completely out. But Gary, you and your team decided to do something different. You decided, you know what? First of all, we're not going to cut our theater partners out. We're going to split the proceeds with them. We don't have to do that. We're going to do it because we believe we're going to do well by doing good. And we're not going to gouge movie fans. We're not going to charge $20 to see the movie. We'll make it a bargain matinee price. We'll make it $6.50, and we'll split those proceeds with those movie theaters who were getting zero revenue. Well, you fast forward now, you know, a couple of months later, and there's a war happening between Universal Pictures and AMC Theaters, and AMC says we're not ever going to show another Universal film because Universal cut their distribution partner out. You guys did well by doing good, and you know, I just want to acknowledge that. I think it's a wonderful thing, and hats off to you and everyone involved with Phoenix, Oregon, for stepping up to do that, and you continue to do that now. This week, and Jesse and I were just talking about this before the interview, and Gary, you might speak to this a little. You're partnering with restaurant owners that are impacted in Oregon, where the movie takes place, to help them out with a restaurant week promotion.
Yeah, you know, it's dinner and a movie. You know, the film has, you know, Jesse plays Carlos, who is very passionate about pizza making, and so making great pizza is sort of one aspect of this film. And so a lot of people see the movie, want to have pizza after they see it. And so one of the person who runs, I'm sorry, Annie really should be speaking to this, so I'll just kind of give general points, that the Oregon Hospitality Foundation has a relief fund where they help restaurants that are in need. And so now that after we had such a good experience partnering with movie theaters, it's going to the same cause, where half the ticket price, instead of going to the movie theater, is going to go into this relief fund, which will help the restaurants in the state of Oregon.
That's a great thing. We're talking with Gary Lundgren, who's the writer and director of the new movie Phoenix, Oregon, and one of the co-stars, Jesse Borrego, who plays Carlos in the film. And we're looking at some pictures, Jesse, of you on set filming with these incredible actors. And these may not be huge names, but they're faces that we've all seen in television shows and movies down through the years. I see you there with Lisa and with James and with Diedrich. And I wonder when actors come together on a set like that, Jesse, if you can speak to this, where maybe you've never met these folks before, but your job is to immediately create a chemistry. How do you go about that as an actor? What's the process there?
Well, I think it's kind of like, I mean, I would like, the analogy would be professional professional athletes. You know, they know each other, right? They know each other. Everybody plays for different teams. Maybe they know each other. They played together in college or competed against each other. But then they get put on a dream team. They get put on a squad, and they know the different guys. And I keep making the analogy, I guess, because The Last Dance is on, about the Chicago Bulls' last championship run with Michael Jordan. But I keep calling or rather James LeGros, I keep calling him the Michael Jordan of this project. And so that makes you the Phil Jackson, Gary. So once I knew that, I loved the project, I loved the character. Once I knew that James was going to play the lead, and again, having done many independent films and having done a lot of projects where chemistry between the cast is so important. And so what I try to do as a team player is right away I try to see, where is my chemistry going to be the best, and how should I present myself that way? I grew up in the theater, so I'm very much an ensemble actor. I love pieces like that. And that's where I shine. So I think when I saw what I was going to do with Carlos, but more than anything, that it was Bobby's story, then I really tried to find, where are we going to have that chemistry? But again, being a fan of James's work, of Lisa, of Diedrich, of Kevin's, and the beauty of it is James and Lisa had worked together already. James had worked with Gary and Annie. Diedrich had worked with Gary and Annie. And so Kevin knew James. So they already had all of this chemistry. So it was kind of easy for me to just step onto the set and do what I do. Gary knows I'm a team player. I'm very supportive. I try to be uplifting as much as possible, because I know that independent filmmaking and production is a very tough process, especially on a limited budget. So I think I wanted to come in with that type of spirit of camaraderie. So right away that functioned for me and James. And then when Lisa showed up, such a wonderful actress, and if you see what she did with the character of Tanya in this film, just how she plays off of other actors, and then just her aesthetic herself. The first day we got there, we actually got a chance to watch a short that she had directed, where her and James played a married couple. And so right away I got to see their chemistry. So all of this, again, to show how an actor processes all of these little signals and cues to know how best to approach the work. And then the rest is gravy, because the minute you start rolling camera, and Gary knows this, the minute you start rolling camera, then you know what you're getting. One of the wonderful things about this process was that we didn't know, as time went on, because of their budget, they hadn't finished casting key characters. So even though me and James did our work together, and I knew that our story was going to be solid, once Lisa showed up and we started doing our stuff, and I knew then what her and James were going to do, then I knew we had 2/3 of the story. But you still got the lead character of Kyle, our boss, and that starts off the film. So if it's not a kick-ass actor, then right away you're going to lose your audience, because you're losing chemistry. So once I knew Diedrich was going to come in and play that character, then I said, okay, now we've got a beginning, now we've got a middle. But same thing we didn't know up until the final week who was going to play Al, the bowling technician. And, you know, there were several people they were looking at, actors that James and Gary, they were familiar with, so they were trying to get on board. And a lot of these choices fell through. Budgetary constraints, time constraints, things like that. So when we finally wound up with Kevin Corrigan, which was on the first list, but somehow or other had cycled back to him, they were ecstatic. And knowing Kevin's work, and again, James having worked with Kevin, they knew each other. And once he got on the set, again, we knew each other from the New York scene. We all knew what we were going to do. At that point, that's when I knew we had a hit. That's when I knew we had a championship run. And so one of the things that I remember saying to Gary, because I saw him towards the end of the production shoot, he was in director mode and he was also in producer mode. So as a director, he's trying to make sure that he finishes all of these elaborate shots that we have to do with the back half of the story. He's got to shoot out all of Kevin's character scenes, all of our scenes left. And he's got to make sure that he's got all of his aces covered. I could tell that he was in the zone. So I went over to him and I said, look, when this is all done and you rest and you get back at this in the editing room, you're going to be able to see the subtle gold that everyone is giving you on camera. And you're going to be able to see the fact that you've got a star cast here and that they gave you gold. And so once I saw the first cut, I knew it. I said, man, this is going to be a beautiful film. Everybody's performances are right here. And Gary was able to make the film that he wanted. And so then he put his aesthetic on it. He put the music. The editing was brilliant. And so I think that at that point, I saw the film that was going to be fully realized. And once I saw it at the Ashland Independent Film Festival, with that audience, core audience, and the way they responded to all of us, to the entire film. And, you know, a film is a journey. And the best films that we like are the ones that we don't remember the minutia. We remember the feeling. We remember everything. It's an experience. And so I think that's what people get out of Phoenix, Oregon, is they really get an experience. You see Carlos, you see his love of the food and how he brings that to fruition. You see his love of the family. You see Bobby's inner struggle and journey. Again, one of the most impressive things is working with this cast, like you were talking about, is seeing everybody's different processes and seeing how they get to the gold that they're going to get on a print. And just knowing the fact that James had basically done the entire emotional internal journey of Bobby in the first week before the rest of us got there. Before the rest of the film is shot, James LeGros has to go through Bobby's internal journey through the entire film, which is very difficult to do because you're by yourself. You haven't worked with any of the other actors. You haven't done any other parts of the script. It's very difficult for an actor to do. But I mean, once again, Gary, you'll agree with me on this. What James did with the Bobby character just gave you so much to work with in terms of what you were going to put together in that final cut to show his internal journey. And, you know, when I watch the film, I'm just flabbergasted because I realize, oh, James shot this in the first week before we even got there. You know, oh my God, you know, the fact that that Kevin showed up in the last week of shooting and did this. He's a fully realized character. And I think that, to me, was the true joy. And I thank you, Gary, for making me a part of this. But the true joy of working with, you know, these stars whose work I knew. And I think that's the long answer to your short question. And I think this is going to go down as one of those projects where I watched the process. There were so many unknowns that when they became known, just made the experience so much richer. And I think you see that. I think you see that in the characters' interactions with each other. I mean, it looks like we've all known each other for years and years and years. And I think that's the beauty of working on a project like this. You know?
And Gary, I want to get into the casting of the movie with you in just a second. But before we do that, looking at the screen right now, we see a young Tiger Beat 16 magazine, Jesse Borrego, from his days on Fame. And it looks like that's Janet Jackson also.
Janet Jackson, baby. That's right.
What was that like as a young guy to suddenly be, thrust into this sort of pin-up kind of teen idol situation? Take me back to that and what you remember about those times.
Well, when you're young and full of vinegar, you know what I mean? The world is your oyster. The wonderful thing about that show is that it was so popular worldwide. I mean, they had done concerts in Israel, they'd done concerts in Italy. We just did a reunion in the UK that had been 30 years in coming because they had done a big concert in the UK. So it was such a popular show that when NBC canceled it, MGM just went ahead and started producing it in syndication. So we were one of the first syndicated TV shows. But again, working with a stellar cast, working with Debbie Allen, Gene Anthony Ray, a lot of the stars that had made their bones not only in the film fame, the Alan Parker film, but in the television show. And then Janet Jackson is the new kid in school. So me, Nia Peoples, and Janet Jackson were the new kids in performing arts school. But I was a singer, dancer. I was already a triple threat. So that was a fun project for me. The interesting thing was because it was so popular, I became an overnight television success, television star. And a lot of that was new to me because I grew up doing Chicano theater, cultural theater, theater in the barrio. And then I went to college and did, legitimate theater. And so all of this fame, all of these accolades, it was kind of a head trip. And the thing that saved me was two. One, my culture is constantly coming home to San Antonio, eating my grandmother's food, listening and performing with my father and doing the Tex-Mex music that he was doing. And then theater. Also, anytime the show would go on hiatus, I worked a lot with a woman named Joanne Akalaitis from Mabou Mines. Philip Glass, Joanne Akalaitis, started a group called Mabou Mines back in the 60s, an experimental theater group. And I started working with her. So while I was on the show, I kept doing performances with her. And so that kind of kept me real, and grounded. And again, that's one of the reasons why now I still choose projects like Phoenix, Oregon, because it's an actor's piece. To me, it's a piece of art. It's a piece of cinema. It's not just entertainment. It's something more than that. And I think again, a lot of the projects that you see I worked on have that type of gravitas to it. And I think that's what I really tried to keep during my time on Fame, which again, was very, very well known. The good thing about Fame is that it was based on real human characters. I was one of a few Mexican-American characters in American television at that time. And I wasn't a drug dealer. I wasn't a drug addict. I wasn't a gang member. And so it was great to be able to start the first 3 years of my professional career playing this character, Jesse Velasquez. And he had my name. Can you believe it? So every time anybody called my name, Jesse from Fame, I had to turn around because that was my real name. But those choices and those characters kind of set the tone for the characters that I would play the rest of my career. And so now you add Carlos to that. Jesse, the young acting student, could have easily become Carlos, the culinary chef. So I think it's a nice little arc to my career. Thank you, Gary. You did it again, Gary. Come on. But I keep trying to convince Gary because of that to write and direct me in a musical. He's resistant, but I'm going to get him. He's going to write a musical. So
Wear
look
him
for
down.
Phoenix, Oregon, the musical.
Wear him down. Phoenix, Oregon is the movie we're talking about, and you can find out more at phoenixoregonmovie.com. And as a matter of fact, you can go there and watch the movie, and whenever you sign up to watch the movie, 50% of the proceeds will go to support an independent cinema and help them as we all fight through this pandemic. There's a great photo up of you guys, Gary, from the set. And one of my favorite parts of this movie was just the incredible casting. I mean, you really, I think, nailed the casting in this film. Those characters, I can't imagine anyone playing those characters except the actors and actresses that you put in those parts. How do you do that? How do you go about casting a film like Phoenix, Oregon. Did you have Jesse, for example, in mind for Carlos? Did you visualize certain people? Is it take me through that process, how you do that?
Well, all of the films I've made, I think, could be categorized as character driven. So it's about their inner journey and also the destination of where they're going in the movie. And I think it's very specific on the page of the interior journey that these characters are going through. Executing that is difficult, but the best thing you can do is hire terrific actors, and then it becomes a collaboration with what you envisioned on the page and what this beautiful human being in front of you, it's kind of where they meet, you know. They intersect at some point, and then it's a matter of just capturing reality, you know. I think James, I had worked with James and Diedrich in previous films, and so I was aware of their talents. Both both of these guys are just terrific actors. You know, you believe what they're doing on screen. They make you laugh. They make you feel something, and you know that's there are a lot of talented actors out there, but there are special actors. And Christine Sheeks is our casting director. We've worked with on all 4 of our films. She's got terrific taste. She's a great sounding board as we start discussing, you know, who's the best person to play Bobby. And you know, before you cast it, you're not totally sure. You know, I thought James would have made a great Kyle too. And so you're kind of spitballing and thinking, well, will James be able to come out to Oregon for a whole month? You know, he's a busy working actor. So you start lists like Jesse said, you know, you have a list of terrific actors that could play Bobby, you know. And I got to admit, James is always at the top of that list. He always kept, you know, you think of someone else, well, that person might make a good Bobby, but what about James LeGros, you know? He's going to nail Bobby, you know. And I think once James read the script, he said, I'm in. And it was a beautiful thing, you know. It doesn't always work that way. I think he wanted to play the part. He even changed his schedule around to do it. The next person was Jesse, and Peter Bratt is a great filmmaker, a friend of ours, a mutual friend. Said you gotta look at Jesse Borrego for Carlos. He is Carlos. That's what he told me. And sure enough, you know, reviewing his work again and talking to Jesse on the phone, it was like, oh my God, this is a match made in heaven. James LeGros and Jesse Borrego. And I got to say that's when I knew we could make a good film, because you can have a script and a vision in a bowling alley, but without the flesh, with the human face and the voices of these guys and the postures of these guys, and you know, just picturing Jesse in the kitchen slinging dough, it was like, oh, this could be a good movie now. You really have to flesh out this world to make the movie believable to an audience. And so from then, it's just trusting your instincts and trusting your team that the right people are going to line up. And that's what happened. Like James and Jesse were both kind of magnets, you know. I think they're both respected actors. And so it's easy for Lisa Edelstein to say yes now, you know. She knows she's going to share the screen with these guys. And so it's sort of, you're building your team and plugging people in. It is a lot like Jesse said about a sports team, where you're trying to find your positions and feel the team that can win, you know. And with independent film, you're often right up against the wall. Like, we got Kevin Corrigan the week before we had to shoot his stuff, and thank God he could do it, you know.
Gary, our host today, our Headline Books, a fine publisher, and you know, every author, at least of a fiction novel, sees in their mind their book as a film. And as a guy who writes screenplays, I wonder if you could share some advice, and I'll ask Jesse the same question, for authors in terms of having their books made into movies. What's the process there?
I would say not all books should be movies necessarily. And I guess I'll say this up front, that, you know, some books, a mini series makes more sense as an adaptation. Just the length of the book, the number of characters. To make a movie, often you need a real solid protagonist or a small ensemble, and the book has to unfold with the beginning, middle, and end. It just sort of has to fit to be a movie. I would say, so have that in your mind, is how many characters do you have? How many subplots do you have? Is what happens is often a book has to kill certain subplots and just leave them off screen. And then people are disappointed who loved your book because they weren't in the movie. Right. So I would say that certain books make great movies. Like I always like to talk about the book Fat City. It was the author's, that was his only book. It was an incredible American novel, and John Huston made a movie of it. And the author actually wrote the script for the movie too. And it's one of those rare cases where I think the book is brilliant and the movie is brilliant, and they're both different, because you have to sort of visualize the movie in a cinematic way. All that interior angst and stuff has to be visual on the screen, and you don't want to have voiceover. So that's my personal opinion. Like, limit the voiceover.
That's the cheat for movie makers. Jesse, what about you? When you're approached by an author who says, "Oh, this book, this should be a movie," and I'm sure you've heard it hundreds of times, what advice do you give authors in terms of that process and how to visualize their book as a movie?
Yeah, my parents were very avid readers, so I grew up reading at a very young age. It's one of the skill sets that's really helped me out as an actor. It's not only being well read, but being able to read. I think for me, most importantly, what resonates either in a book or a film is the representation of who we are as human beings, the human experience. I mean, those are the books, those are the stories we resonate to the most. I think that because one of the things that we teach in our film classes is the change from being a writer of, a literary writer, to writing a screenplay, which is really more of a blueprint for what you're trying to create. The montage, the visual narrative, and what that skill set requires. And so I think I see a lot of good writers have to kind of take a learning curve to get to writing a screenplay. And I think that's what we try to wrap their heads around, is how do you take this literary narrative, which is read, and how do you transfer that into something that's going to be a visual narrative? And how do you retain the things that you love about the literary part of it, the dialogue, the tone, the theme, all of that somehow or other has to be kept in the script, like Gary said, in order for it to visually come across. And it's two different, they're two different arts, and they're two different ways of absorbing that. One is very visual, very visceral. The other one is very intellectual. and very imaginative. So between those two extremes, and especially as an actor, I have to kind of do the same thing when we talk about, doing stuff on stage and doing stuff in film, and the subtle differences, but the similarities between the skill set of what it takes. But I think more importantly than anything is story, narrative. What is the story? What is the story we're telling? How does it resonate with the human experience? And then how can I transfer that to the next manifestation? The comic book, the book, the film, the television series. And I think as a producer now and as a developer, trying to figure out how to take some of these stories that I want to do and take them to that point that I would produce them, that I would star in them, that I would direct them or produce them. I think I've seen now that process, and I understand a little more about what it takes. But I think it's still about, does the story touch you? And that being said, I think you can make any story universal. I think you can make any story resonate with your core audience. But it's about the aesthetic of the individual artist. So it'd be interesting. I don't know if Gary's ever taken an adaptation of something, because he's such a great writer. So I don't know if he'd take a crack at somebody's book and adapting it. And would you want someone else to adapt it, or would you adapt it yourself, Gary? That's Gary's question. My question to him.
I would want to adapt it. I think certainly I'm a good collaborator though, so I would collaborate, but I would definitely want to weigh in on just how to adapt it, because you are adapting it. You're changing it. Often people read a book and they say, the movie wasn't the same as the book. Well, it has to be different. It has to be different than the book. How do you, like Jesse said, how do you retain the tone, the themes? How do you visualize the characters and their objectives and the stuff that you internalize in the novel? How do you lean on cinematic language to communicate that rather than voiceover or lots of expository writing? You have to take the exposition out and visualize the story. Like I'll mention Fat City again. If you don't know the book, read the book. It's one of the great American novels, in my opinion. And then watch how the same author of the book wrote the screenplay. They're two totally different things. And then watch what John Huston did with that movie. And it's like the bar is so high on both, and they're both completely different, but then they're both the same. So it's a great study.
Gary Lundgren, the writer and director of Phoenix, Oregon. Jesse Borrego, one of the stars of the film, joining us on this special Zoom into Books to talk about Phoenix, Oregon. You can watch the movie at phoenixoregonmovie.com, phoenixoregonmovie.com. And remember, half the proceeds will go to your local independent theater. Now, you only have a few weeks left to do that, because the digital rollout of this film, when you'll be able to see it on all these platforms where you can watch it at home, begins June 1st. So if you want to help out an independent theater in your area, try to get in there and do that in the next couple of weeks. Gary, I want to leave the last word with you in terms of this movie being sort of the little movie that could, despite the pandemic, despite everyone's world changing completely. I think there's an argument to be made that more people have actually seen Phoenix, Oregon because of these world circumstances than might have seen it in theaters. Jesse says yes.
I think so. Yeah. I think, it's tough. It's tough for a small movie without a huge marketing budget to blow it out, so it's on 2,000 screens and everyone's heard about it. It's almost impossible to do that without millions and millions of dollars going into prints and advertising. And I think because of the situation and our pivot, perhaps more people are seeing it. I don't know. I'm certainly grateful for our team and for all the people out there who are watching it at home and sending us nice notes about how much they like the movie. It means a lot. We're certainly trying to take this movie across the finish line. And there's still a long ways to go. We still have, we're still trying to make it profitable. Movies are very expensive. And so these next few weeks are important that a lot more people see it. We certainly want to roll out the digital release as well as we can and try to stay on that radar. There's a lot of stuff competing for people's attention in today's world. So you have to do what you can. And word of mouth is important. So if you like the movie, certainly talk about it. That it's that kind of thing that has sustained us this far, with fans recommending the movie to other people. So it's one of those things where we're grateful for anyone out there who's watched it and has enjoyed it and has spread the word about Phoenix, Oregon.
Well, there's a real sweetness to this film that I think resonates with everyone. Jesse Borrego, thank you so much for being a part of this. Gary Lundgren, thank you as well. The movie is Phoenix, Oregon, and you can find out more at phoenixoregonmovie.com, phoenixoregonmovie.com. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today for Zoom Into Books and Headline Books. I'm Burke Allen. Have a great day. Check it out, phoenixoregonmovie.com. Bye, everybody.